Welcome to the 11th episode of the Tertius Times. In honor of the observance of Labor Day here in the United States, we will look at a report on child labor. There is no interview segment for this week. Hopefully, there will be a guest interview, however, for next week. The report, Child Labor Global Estimates 2020, Trends and the Road Forward, published by the International Labor Organization, UNICEF, or the United Nations Children's Fund in 2021, states that, quote, global progress against child labor has stalled for the first time since we began producing global estimates 2 decades ago. In addition, without urgent mitigation measures, the COVID-19 crisis is likely to push millions more into child labor, unquote. The report points out that the worst forms of child labor entail all forms of slavery or practices similar to slavery, such as the sale and trafficking of children, debt bondage and serfdom, including forced or compulsory labor, compulsory recruitment of children for use in armed conflict, the use, procuring, or offering of a child for prostitution, for the production of pornography or for pornographic purposes, the use, procuring, or offering of a child for illicit activities, in particular for the production and trafficking of drugs, as defined in the relevant international treaties, and work that, by its nature or circumstances, is likely to harm the health, safety, or morals of children, unquote. Some of the points outlined in the report include: 1, quote, child labor remains a persistent problem in the world today. Nearly 1 in 10 of all children worldwide, quote unquote, are victims of child labor, and nearly half work in hazardous conditions, which, quote, directly endangers their health, safety, and moral development. It further defines hazardous work as, quote, work that exposes children to physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Work underground, underwater, at dangerous heights, or in confined spaces with dangerous machinery, equipment, and tools, or that involves the manual handling or transport of heavy loads, or work in an unhealthy environment, unquote. 2, global pandemic progress against child labor has stagnated since 2016. 3, the global picture masks continued progress against child labor in Asia and the Pacific and Latin America and the Caribbean. The good news is that those areas have, quote, trended down over the last few years, unquote, but sub-Saharan Africa has not mirrored such success, where, quote, there are now more children in child labor than in the rest of the world combined, unquote. Some of the reasons for the preponderance of child labor in sub-Saharan Africa include what is referred to as, quote, formal economic activity, unquote, which is under the table and, of course, unregulated, as well as the lack of social protection, lack of adequate education funding, population growth, the global HIV/AIDS pandemic, natural disasters, and poverty. One of the charts, in fact, in the report contains the headline, quote, Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest share of young children in child labor, while Latin America and the Caribbean has the largest share of older children, unquote. 4, continued progress was registered over the last 4 years among children aged 12 to 14 and 15 to 17, unquote. Unfortunately, however, child labor rose among young children aged 5 to 11, unquote, seeing an additional 16.8 million more of them in child labor. 5, quote, the COVID-19 crisis threatens to further erode global progress against child labor unless urgent mitigation measures are taken, unquote. Poverty rates as a direct result of the pandemic have risen, as well as increasing child labor, due also in part to school closures. Estimates are that by the end of next year, 8.9 million more children will be victims of child labor. Other concerns related to global child labor are, quote, involvement in child labor is higher for boys than girls at all ages, unquote. Although, quote, household chores for 21 hours or more each week, unquote, reduces the gender gap by, quote unquote, almost half. A chart in the report is entitled Child Labor Has Declined Faster Among Girls Than Boys. It shows that 23.4% of boys and 22.5% of girls were in child labor in 2000. That has dropped to 7.8% of girls and 11.2% of boys in 2020. These are significant decreases, but as the report recognizes, progress has stalled since 2016, and of course, more work needs to be done. Quote, child labor is much more common in rural areas, unquote, by a factor of nearly 3 compared to urban areas. Quote, most child labor, over 75% for boys and girls alike, continues to occur in agriculture, unquote. Quote, the largest share of child labor takes place within families, unquote. The report adds, quote, more than 1 in 4 children aged 5 to 11 and nearly half of children aged 12 to 14 in family-based child labor are in work likely to harm their health, safety, or morals. Quote, child labor is frequently associated with children being out of school, unquote. The report adds that, quote, more than a quarter of children aged 5 to 11 and over a third of children aged 12 to 14 who are in child labor are out of school. For those children who work and attend school, they generally lag behind non-working peers in grade progression and learning achievement and are more likely to drop out prematurely. And children engaged in hazardous work are even less likely to attend school. Of course, this information and these statistics are necessarily speculative. Some countries are more diligent in their reporting than others, so there could very well be even more child labor victims, unfortunately. This article, Child Labor, Facts, FAQs, and How to End It, unquote, by WorldVision, was updated in June 22nd of 2021. It draws upon the information provided by the International Labor Organization / UNICEF report we just discussed. As a Christian organization, WorldVision adds a dimension of seeking God and understanding this issue in the charity of a Christian context. For practical steps we can all take, WorldVision offers some advice. To pray for the children in abusive work situations, give to WorldVision's work that focuses on protecting children and sponsor a child, which would allow the child to stay in school. While the ILO / UNICEF report focuses on governments and intragovernmental agencies cooperating to end the tragedy of child labor abuses, and this is certainly important, we also need to pray, as WorldVision points out, for those children who find themselves in situations beyond their control and from which they will suffer a lifetime of trauma in addition to the disabilities thrust upon them to function as adults and societal contributors. Pray for those whose abuse of their positions of authority to allow or to be directly involved in child labor. Pray that they would truly understand the words of Jesus when he said, quote, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were cast into the sea than he should cause one of these little ones to sin. Luke 17:2. Pray for all children around the world that they would be free to be children living in safety, security, and liberty. Finally, watch this brief 1 minute and 52-second video on the impact of COVID-19 on child labor, published by Human Rights Watch. The link will be in the description.